Hi guys, Dr. David Warwick of Warwick Chiropractic and Massage, and today I wanted to bring something together for me that was actually fairly near and dear to my heart when I saw it come through, and I have next to me here author Stephen Elliott from War Story, a recently published book. But I think what struck me as a healthcare provider, but also as being someone who was working at Madigan Army Medical Center during the time of the surge in the war, was being a healthcare provider and how that impacted lives on so many different levels. And so when I started reading the book, I said, this really needs to get conveyed, or this message needs to get out to all of you on some level. And I think it takes a lot of strength, perseverance, but definitely a story like we all have in our lives of how to somehow continue on, even during the trials and tribulations. So I'm going to do a brief introduction here. Stephen Elliott. I actually have known you since our girls were in kindergarten.
12 years, I think.
Has it been that long?
Yeah, I think
oh my
so.
gosh. I think I was like a few pounds lighter at that time. But, so I'm just going to have briefly describe what the book is about, what you were trying to convey, or whatever you want to share with the audience, and we'll just kind of interject questions or just have conversation here. Guys, I think this is really important. So make sure you share this with other people out there. So I'm going to hand off a little bit to you, and we'll just kind of go back and forth.
Sounds good, Dave. Yeah, thanks so much for allowing me to chat, and it's fun to, as we're going on 12 years here in Olympia community, it's fun to just see the connections and the friendships that we have, and so thankful for you guys.
Yeah,
in that.
likewise.
But, War Story was just published May 21st. Been a number of years in the making. The long and short of the story, and then sort of the give you 30 seconds on the story itself, and then the why of it, which I think is not that it's more important, but that's kind of the point, is not to simply tell a story, but to actually hopefully put that story in service of catalyzing change, and we can talk more specifically about that. But I live here in Olympia, Washington, just next to Fort Lewis, McChord, because I was once in the Army. And so I joined the Army in 2003, and I was assigned to 2nd Ranger Battalion here at Fort Lewis in the end of 2003. And in 2004, as a Ranger, I deployed to the Afghan-Pakistan border, along with many others, as that war was continuing to escalate, and then as the war in Iraq was just getting started. The upshot of kind of what I experienced as a Ranger was in my platoon were two brothers by the name of Pat and Kevin Tilman, and I worked with both of them every day. I worked with Kevin pretty closely. He and I were in the same squad. Pat, of course, had gained some level of notoriety because he gave up an NFL football contract in order to enlist in the Army, and so we deployed. April 22nd, 2004, our platoon was ambushed, and we sustained 4 casualties that day, 2 dead and 2 wounded, and one of those who was killed was Pat. We came to find out very quickly that all of those casualties were as the tragic result of friendly fire, where one part of the platoon mistakenly fired on the other part, believing them to be the enemy. And there was a variety of mitigating circumstances, confusing sort of attributes to that whole engagement. But in any case, that was the result. And then as things kind of further evolved and became known, it became clear that it was likely one of 2 people that were responsible for Pat's death, and I'm one of those 2 people. And so that was not something that I handled particularly well. It was that was in many respects kind of the beginning of the story, and War Story is really it's not about Pat. It's not about his role as some sort of icon in our society. It's really about the fact that this story, to the extent that it's worth engaging with, is worth engaging with not because it's unique, but precisely because it's ordinary. And I think I say that in the preface of the book, exactly those words, because my story, my past, my pain, my guilt, my shame, all of those things, I'm not the only one. Pat was one of 6,000 plus individuals that have died in Iraq and Afghanistan. His life is not any more or less valuable than anybody else's son or daughter who's died there. And at the same time, that incident gets a certain amount of attention because of him. If the roles were reversed and I was the one who didn't come home, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. And so that was something for a long time, over a decade. I fought long and hard to not mention anything and really hide my identity as even somebody who'd been in the Army, because you didn't know who you'd run into, you didn't know who you'd talk to. Yeah. Somebody finds out, oh, you're in the military. Oh, what'd you do? And then, do you tell them at some point, depending on what they know and what their questions are? Do you tell them you're an Army Ranger? And you tell them you were only a Ranger for 8 months? And, well, that's not normal. Why did that happen? And then you were always like 2 or 3 questions away from the thing that you were most ashamed of in your life. And so it was only about 5 years ago, when there were some opportunities to start telling some of our perspective of the story, that it became evident that I wasn't alone, that trauma, that mental health issues, which I struggled with for years in terms of post-traumatic stress and all manner of things. There's myriads and myriads of other military and spouses and kids that are dealing with that as well. And so this idea that your pain, your past is so unique to you, and that if somebody knew who you actually were, that they wouldn't want to have anything to do with you, is a lie. That's not true. And then you also discover that whether it's post-traumatic stress, whether it's just all manner of woundedness and trauma that folks deal with in life, that is no respecter of the uniform you wear. In seeking to honor our military and our first responders, which we should, and care for them, which we should, we can't miss the fact that whether it's post-traumatic stress or trauma or whatever words you want to use for it, this is a human problem. This isn't a military problem. It has a myriad of different expressions, whether it's from the battlefield or whether it's from the home. But what we've seen, in our hope in even writing down the story that I experienced, is to put that story in service of helping to change the narrative about how we talk about mental health. The stigma around mental health, I think it's getting better, but it still persists. I was a financial professional. I am a financial professional, and I got out of the Army in 2007. And I had all manner of resources available to me to seek help for what I was struggling with. And I didn't, because I didn't have a context or a container to have those conversations without viewing myself as somebody fit for a straitjacket. It was a very binary view in my mind. Either I was an alpha male, fully capable of doing my job, leading my home, and going to war on behalf of my country, or I was feeble and weak and broken. And the reality was I was weak and broken. But what made that worse was pretending like I wasn't. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times, and sometimes this is more acute for guys than it is for women, not always, but I certainly see that in myself and others, where in an attempt to appear strong, we don't want to talk about where we're hurting. Yeah. And the irony of that is that just makes the broken places more painful.
Compounded by being in a military setting,
yeah.
Which, I got to use this word, indoctrinates you into avoiding the pain and moving forward. They train you to do that, so you have to kind of shed that.
It's a good word. The literal program at the time that is the Ranger Selection Program. It's been changed at the time, but at the time it was called the Ranger Indoctrination Program. So they didn't really sidestep that too much as far as what they were trying to do.
But that's what I think creates, I think that level of service or training creates that kind of war, if I could use the word warrior.
Yeah,
right. You're trained in a certain way for what we have to do at a certain time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right or wrong. So, yeah, I do know that when I work at Madigan Army Medical Center as a chiropractor for active duty personnel, I was there in 2007, 8, 9, and then left in 10. And I remember how heavy that weighed on them, especially as every unit or brigade turned around, and they turned around quickly. It was it felt like way before a year even in their first brigade, get back and they're turning around, going again. And that just builds and compounds on people. And you see that, and while you're in the hospital there, I don't think we as people, but healthcare providers, are really prepared to deal with as much of the aftermath about what happens during the course of war, but situations that are occurring. But I wanted to bring this circle around to, is there or was there possibly something that you would have wanted other people to do to help you through the healing process, or do you think you were not there yet?
It's a good question.
And the reason I ask that, because while being at the hospital, and I briefly mentioned this to you before, is that some people would get to the point of numerous amount of medications, too many to sometimes count, and leading to things of suicide, conversations of that, and they were there and then they weren't there. And from lowest level of private all the way up to colonel, master sergeant, all across the board, I saw this happening. Was there something that other people could have did, even in intervening, that you would have been receptive to at some time to help you, or do you think you had to get to a place, or both?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I think that for me especially, again, I was in a unique position. Even when I left Ranger Regiment, I worked for flag officers, general officers, and I had I worked a ton, but I had a lot more freedom than if I would have been a squad leader in an infantry unit. Had a lot of resources available to me, and I was so scared to even admit that I couldn't handle it on my own, that you could have had every possible modality of treatment lined up buffet style for me and say, hey Stephen, you got the next 2 months to just give it a shot and try whatever. I would have probably said no thanks, because in a weird way, and this was my thinking for a long time as I kind of unpacked it, was that to seek treatment, whatever that meant, if that was talk therapy, if that was whatever it was to in some way to validate the fact that I'm not okay. And then also I was frankly just really afraid. I was a big sissy about it, because if I was afraid of what happens if I do actually start trying all these modalities of treatment, and I didn't even know what they were. I couldn't have told you about an EMDR. As far as I knew, it was just like, well, I guess I'm going to go and just tell sad stories to somebody for 45 minutes once a week, and that's
talk therapy.
Which is fine. I mean, that's frankly better than nothing, because it's real, it's going on, and I think that was a lot of ego and a lot of pride to think that, well, I can cognitively think my way out of what I'm feeling. When I feel sorry for myself and I'm struggling with guilt and shame, I go with one of my bosses, general officer, to visit people in Walter Reed, circa 2005, and the narrative the voice in your brain is, you don't deserve any of that. Like, there's people here who don't have their arms and legs, and you're feeling sorry for yourself for how you feel, for the fact that you have nightmares and the fact that you're drinking more alcohol than you'd like to, for a situation that frankly you unwittingly helped create as a shooter in an instance. So all of a sudden, all of that is ludicrous, because nobody is wheeled into an ER with a second chest wound, and the MDs say, or even yourself, you don't have a conversation saying, so you slipped the disc. We need to have a conversation whether or not you deserve to be wounded and whether or not you deserve treatment. It's just like, you're hurt.
Yeah.
And we're going to treat you and we're going to help you. And we want to understand if you were doing something risky you shouldn't have been doing to hurt yourself. Well, by all means, don't do that. But it's not an either or. Yeah, the person who lost their leg in an IED attack in Baghdad, they should get treated, and you can get treated too. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not this cerebral exercise to sort of, you can't think your way out of it.
That's because as a society we equate physical as damage, and the emotional wound we don't see.
That's right.
We don't see the emotional wounds, and people carry that all the time. So that can be a way, like I heard you say EMDR, and you guys, that's a way. So EMDR is just one modality of helping reprogram emotional connections that occur in the brain, because guys, we are emotional beings. We feel things whether you're at war or not at war, and you tough it up and suck it up and move on. But there are things so I explain to my patients, and while I'm not trained in psychology or a therapist, I deal with it every day as a healthcare provider and have to recognize that, but the life is like a filing cabinet almost, and we have different drawers. Picture it as a 4-drawer filing cabinet, and every time you have something happen in your life, you file it in the drawer. But eventually, as you have more experiences, those things go backward and they're still in the drawer. A lot of times, like with EMDR, you have to take the file from the back of the drawer and start moving it down to the drawer. Rarely do you go to the bottom of the drawer. It's still there, but it doesn't have the charge like you would in the
exactly right.
The charge I could use is it doesn't hit you as much. So, and that's a way of reprogramming the neurons in the brain is basically. And I know on posts they do offer that, especially as the military is more open to non-traditional, as it is in chiropractic is being offered to active duty personnel, offered to veterans now as well, which is all part of the healing for people as well. So
yeah, I mean, so to answer your question, I kind of rambled a little bit, but to answer your question, it was mostly a me problem, not being willing and not having the guts to just, I mean, that's step 1 of every 12-step program is there's a problem, and we have to at least acknowledge there's a problem. And acknowledging the problem doesn't fix the problem per se, but man, it can sure bring some relief by just saying, can we just say that this is not as it should be? Can we just stop pretending that you're supposed to be this way, that's health? And so I had to go through just a lot of dark times before it got bad enough for me to get to that place.
Were people reaching out to you though too?
They were, but the problem with me anyway is I'm a really good and to some degree
you hide it.
Yeah, I'm a good performer, and I'm really good and you know, being in a unit like the Ranger Regiment probably to some degree self-selects for people who are better at compartmentalizing, because you have to, and we all have to in life, right? If you had an argument with your kids over breakfast and then you have to show up at the office, well, you got to do that.
Yep.
But then at some point you have to be able to turn off the work life and actually address, you know, whatever dysfunction or conversation is going on. And I was never doing the latter, right? It was a compartmentalization that if I pretend that I'm okay, then I should be okay. And so I needed, I think a lot of people just didn't know how bad it was for me for a long time, because that was precisely what I was going for. And so I think to some degree War Story, the message of War Story, which is, there isn't a baked in like thou shalt message, it's just a story. You can love it, you can hate it, you can identify with parts of it, not others, that's fine, it's just a story, it's just what we experienced. But part of, I think, one of the embedded things that you can see within my character in the story is somebody that didn't know how and was afraid to ask for help. And that's kind of one part of the equation, is we have to create, and that happens one relationship, one conversation at a time, where we help create a world in which there's safety and acceptance for people in the right way to just say, hey, I'm not really sure what to do with this, and you may not be able to fix me, and that's okay, but I feel like there's something going on that's not right, and I just need some help. And I think that, just that right there, none of us were made for isolation. We were all made in and for community.
Yes.
And it's not a measure of strength for you to say, I did it all by myself. And I think to some degree, our culture, particularly in America, we uphold that value to an unhealthy degree. The idea of the rugged individualist, the self-made man, whatever, that person does not and has never existed. Every billionaire, trillionaire, anybody who's done anything, good, bad, or indifferent, of consequence in the world has done so perhaps with a lot of hard work and a lot of initiative, but they've done so within the context of other people that were working with them. Absolutely. And so we all need that. And I think that's the freedom I needed, was as somebody who was, well, you're an Army Ranger and you know you should be, you know, strong enough to deal with this. It's not a function of that. Those are two separate conversations, because if you're experiencing woundedness of the heart, mind, or soul, that is, and that is, as we see in the suicide statistics, that is just, and we don't see, because we don't track it, divorce statistics and job loss statistics and all the other things that, you know, suicide is the tip of the iceberg in terms of all the other dysfunction that comes from those wounds not being treated. And so we can pretend all day long that they shouldn't be an issue or that I should be able to deal with it. The fact of the matter is, it's killing us, literally killing us, and it has been for a long time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. if there was a message you wanted to give any of the audience out there from this book, well, I would recommend reading it. I'm already in the middle or the beginning of it, and I mean, just the title and the prologue and some other people that were involved in the process of this book. It struck me almost instantly. I said, this is, like I was sharing with you, bigger than me. Bigger than, because I think this can help those if you know someone out there. So is there a message beyond the book, what you convey through that you would like to share with everyone of how it can help them, or what they can do?
I think two things. I mean, one is, whether you read the book or not, certainly, pick it up, listen to it on Audible. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. I think it's just two things. One is just in the telling of stories itself. That's how we as humans communicate and connect. Before there was this medium, before there was anything else, we were sitting around some form of heat, if we were lucky enough to have it, and some form of sustenance, and we were telling stories. And that's how we understand and connect with each other's experiences. So I hope, if nothing else, I hope in me sitting down and writing down a story that was one that I thought I would never tell, that perhaps that moves the needle and gives other people some freedom to tell some of their stories as well, because we need all of our stories. Each of us have connections and relationships that are unique to us, and we're vital as parts of our community. And so, if nothing else, one, I just hope that it creates more freedom to be able to talk honestly about our past, to the extent we need to, because we're never going to move on to our future unless we've dealt with that. And then the second is, we do have some very specific policy initiatives that we want to see changed at the active duty component in the military. One thing that is common for all veterans, which I'm stating blatantly obvious here, but I think it's worth saying it, is that every veteran was once on active duty.
Yes.
And so it's unfair, as perhaps broken in certain aspects as the VA is. It's unfair for us to sit back and shake our head and say, my gosh, the veteran suicide statistic, for instance, if the VA could just get their act together. Well, you know what? A lot of those people, and I was one of them, who was a veteran on the rolls of the VA for 5 years before my wife and I were looking at divorce, and I was just starting to unpack the wounds that I've been carrying around since 2004. So we have to, policies regarding stigma, policies that regard how behavioral health professionals are even just controlled and supervised and given resources to do their work. There's so many things that could change at the active duty level that would make a huge difference to keep people from becoming the VA's problem, so to speak. And obviously that has implications as well. Mental health stigma is not confined to the military. It's in medical professions. It's in all manner of aspects of our life where, spoken or unspoken, it can feel really unsafe. And even if it's safe, we don't know how to do it. And so, if you're inclined to learn more about that, you can go to elliottfund.org. That's the organization to which all proceeds from this book that I would otherwise receive, we're giving to the Elliott Fund, and then we in turn give that money away to other nonprofits. So I'm not making money on the book. But then we're also using elliottfund.org as a platform for social justice. So we have a petition that's addressed to the Secretary of Defense and the chairmen of the House and Senate Armed Services committees. And we just want to turn the volume up and say, hey, yeah, these are, literally we have a list of, these are 17 things that we would like to see changed for the better of our men and women in uniform. And so that very much is, we hope the story is not the end of your engagement, but that's the beginning of catalyzing change.
I think with just getting the book, reading the book, but also if you identify with someone's needing help, reaching out to them, whether you think you should or not, reach out to them, I think is really important, because sometimes people don't feel like they can turn anywhere. But just that simple act to say, hey, get some help. Also, for all of us, I mean, you haven't truly lived your life. If you don't have a story or stories. That's part of living life. And guess what? Life is ugly and good at times, and really freaking ugly, if I could say it that way. And that's part of living and overcoming that. So if you yourself are suffering with something, reach out to healthcare providers, reach out to someone that you entrust. And guess what, guys? just because it's not the right provider. Next.
That's right.
And don't give up is what I can say in that element. Having lost friends in law enforcement to suicide, classmates to suicide, seeing that firsthand on post at the hospital. You always wonder, as those left behind, what could I have done different? And just speaking up. If it falls on deaf ears, go to someone else. Don't be afraid to do that. The hardest step you'll make, and I think there was something in your, and I can't remember it, you can refresh my memory, war story, and there was the subtopic underneath there, and it was like something about the biggest battle begins after the battle.
It's the title is, it's war story. Sometimes the real fight starts after the battle,
and that's true
for me. Yeah.
I mean, your first biggest step that you make afterward is a tough one. Stepping forward with that. So, I appreciate it. So, anyways, we're probably a little bit out of time here.
You have some people to adjust.
Yeah, no kidding. So we did this over a lunch period and that. So thank you for watching. I'm Dr. David Warwick at Warwick Chiropractic. Look in the description. We're going to have some of the websites and information on there for you to reach out to. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.